the Civil War pitted brother against brother and divided a nation. It also featured the most epic and deadliest battles in American history. From Shiloh to Vicksburg to Gettysburg, these battles resulted in higher casualty rates than any other armed conflict the United States ever faced. But beyond the death toll, the Civil War did more to define and change the United States than any other event. The Revolutionary War may have answered the question whether or not the United States would survive, but the Civil War determined what kind of nation the United States would be. Would it be a nation that promised rights based on the dictum that all men are created equal, even though 4 million people were enslaved in the United States based on absolutely nothing else than the color of the skin? Or would it live up to the promise? Would the United States follow the path of Thomas Jefferson, who thought that America's success lay in its agrarian tradition and localized government? Or would it follow the path of Alexander Hamilton, who believed in manufacturing and commerce and a strong federal government with a national bank to maintain public credit and consolidate the state's debt? Moreover, the Civil War answered the question that the Founding Fathers had of whether this new nation could actually survive, or would it be split apart into many different directions. In this series, we're going to look at these questions by looking at the most important battles in Civil War history, or a history of the Civil War in 10 battles. This series is hosted by me and James Early, who also joined me on the series Presidential Fight Club. James really takes the reins in this series because he's been a Civil War buff for decades. He's taught it at the high school and college level. He's even been involved in reenactments, and he's visited about every Civil War battle site you can imagine. So he's really leading the charge here, and I'm along for some color commentary and also befuddled and dumbfounded by different things along the way. And James sets it all straight. The 10 battles we're going to look at are Bull Run, Border States and Shiloh, the Peninsula Campaign, Antietam, Chancellorsville, the Vicksburg Campaign, Gettysburg, Chickamauga and Chattanooga, Sherman's March to the Sea, and the Overland Campaign. But we're not just going to be talking about the battles themselves, although there is a lot of that. We're also going to be talking about Civil War era tactics and strategy, how many of the generals were trained in the strategy of Napoleon and his flanking maneuvers and his charges, and how these evolved over time and came to include entrenchment and really creating the philosophies that go all the way up to World War I. We talk about new weapons technology of the time, the rifled muskets and minié-ball, the main weapons deadly at hundreds and hundreds of yards, instead of just a few dozen yards like they were in the Revolutionary or Napoleonic Wars. We talk about medicine, how the technology to kill had advanced, but the technology to heal really hadn't. How combat surgeons had to perform lots of grisly amputations, and the Civil War, because you didn't have combat medics who drug you off the battlefield, was one of the most terrifying conflicts to be involved in. In this series, we also talk about the biographies of Civil War generals themselves and the colorful cast of characters that make up the leadership for the Union and the Confederacy. Some of these generals were combat veterans of the Mexican-American War, but many others had almost no military background at all. Some were failed businessmen or bankers. One was an Episcopalian bishop. Another was even a philosophy professor. Some were wealthy plantation owners. But despite these different backgrounds, you see some have enormous success, like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who enters the Civil War as a private, rises all the way to the position of general, and becomes an absolute terror as a cavalry commander. And because military battles are completely intertwined with politics, we talk about the background of the Civil War, we talk about emancipation, we talk about the involvement of African Americans in combat, both on the Union side, but interestingly enough, even on the Confederate side. We also do a matchup of Robert E. Lee versus Ulysses S. Grant. Who is the better general? Something military history aficionados have been arguing about for decades. And then we mention why the Civil War is remembered the way it is and how memory of the past can be politicized. So this is a massive series. It'll go on for about 20 episodes or so. But you're going to learn a ton about aspects of the Civil War. And if you know nothing diving in, that's okay. I really didn't know that much. James is an excellent guide, and I do my part where I can. And I think you'll really get a lot out of the series, even if you don't know much about the Civil War or have much of a background to it. You'll see how this event still affects not only the United States, but global civilization to this day. So I hope you enjoyed this series on a history of the Civil War in 10 battles. Thanks for listening to the Key Battles in the Civil War podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show in the podcast player of your choice and leave us a rating and a review. This helps us grow and reach new listeners. You can also find maps of the battle sites, show notes to each episode, and plenty of other history info by going to keybattlesinthecivilwar.com.